Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of the Change Physician Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady. And today we have on as a very special guest, Dr. Rael Mazansky. And Dr. Mazansky has an amazing story about how you went into medical school, how you discovered then that maybe the life of a doctor wasn't right for you, but rather than moving into the golden handcuffs, which a lot of our listeners have experienced and may be experiencing now, you made some choices pretty early on in your career to forge a very different and innovative career path. So, Rael, it's great to have you on the show today.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
So let's start off then, just at the beginning. Why did you go to medical school to start? What was your thinking, expectations, or intentions behind that?
So I grew up wanting to be a doctor. My dad was a doctor. I have an uncle who's a doctor. I have a great uncle who's a doctor. And so medicine is very much in my family. My parents were immigrants. They came from South Africa to the United States. My dad had a successful career in medicine. I grew up, liking science and math and liking the things that I think, people generally enjoy doing, the science that can lead to a career in medicine. And so I had it as this career aspiration with my dad as a role model. My sister was also pre-med in college. And so I very much had it in my family, and that's what I thought I wanted to do. So, I took a lot of science in high school. I took AP classes and what have you, and went off to college thinking that I wanted to be a doctor. And I was, of course, pursued all the pre-med requirements in college and applied to med school thinking that that's what I wanted to do.
So pretty early on, it sounds like if you're aggressive in high school, that before even college, you were thinking, I'm going to be a doctor. Was it one of those things, where you have, 5 years old and I'm going to be a doctor, or did it evolve later on?
No, very much so. I mean, when I was a kid, I was reading my dad's anatomy textbooks that were on the shelf. I mean, ever since I can remember, that's what I felt like I wanted to do. I grew up with it. I used to, like I said, look at these pictures in the anatomy textbook, and it's kind of, I used to go into my dad's practice on the weekends. I used to help out my mom. She ran the practice from the administrative side. And so, it's what I thought I always wanted to do ever since I was a kid.
So I and this is just amazing to me, because you have like what you would think is like the ideal pre-med background, where you're surrounded by physicians. You have all these experiences. You have your mom's experiences with the practice itself, and your father's actual practice as a physician. You enter medical school. What happens next?
So what happens next is I go into the first and second year of medical school, and it's an incredibly challenging, busy, intense period of time, but one where I actually was enjoying it, because it was doing, I would say, more of the same as what I enjoyed. I loved the science of it. The first 2 years obviously are the non-clinical years, and just spent that time just being very enriched by the academics of what I was learning. And it almost felt to me like kind of a fifth and sixth year of college, insofar as it was a highly academic experience. And so I would say those first 2 years were, I can look back now and say there were signs that maybe I wasn't as happy as I should have been, but that's a tough calculus, because I don't know too many first year med students that would call themselves happy with all that they have to do. So I can look back in kind of a post-hoc way and say, well, geez, maybe I wasn't enjoying it as much as I should have. But those first 2 years were very fulfilling. I made some great friends that I still, have today, some lifelong friends, and just really thought that I was on the track to become a doctor.
So what happened with third and fourth year?
Well, so I I would say, it became fairly evident that when I started my clinical rotations, that's when it became obvious to me fairly quickly that practicing medicine was not going to be the right career choice for me. And it was a bit of a shock because, I think we all grow up, we all have conceptions of what it's like to be a doctor. Everyone goes to the doctor, you know what it's like to be a patient. I just found it a very different experience and unexpectedly, kind of a dissonant experience for me to actually be the one that was learning to be at that time, learning to be play the role of the doctor, someone who was responsible for going into patients' rooms and seeing patients and having those encounters. And for various reasons, it became clear to me that the kind of the sort of the process of doing it and the kinds of thought paradigms that are required to be a good diagnostician and a good clinician and a good treating clinician were not ones that appealed to me. And so, in that, as that third year went on and on, I was hoping that, what I think also is just the inevitable shock of being thrown into the intensity of clinical rotations and being forced, out of your comfort zone, kind of being taken out of a library and put into intense situations in a hospital or a clinical environment. What I was hoping was just maybe the shock, that it was just the shock of that kind of transition. Turned out, in fact, not to be a shock, but it turned out to be that I actually just didn't enjoy it, and that wasn't what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. So as that third year went on, that conclusion, I think, became more and more solidified. And it was at that time, I would say, sort of towards the middle end of my third year clinical rotations, that I realized that I needed to start to think about other things and start going through the thought process of both of understanding what it was that I wanted to do or what I thought I could be happy doing. And then, sort of a separate, I would say, learning and discovery process of figuring out what else was out there in the wide world that would match up with my career goals.
So I'm curious for those listening. I mean, obviously, you're not the only person that's gone through this, but I think it takes a lot of courage and bravery to midstream reconsider the choices for not just financial reasons, but a lot of other reasons, maybe family expectations, a lot of other things. But is there anything, looking back in hindsight, that may have helped you realize that, I mean, if you could have, I mean, maybe you can't because you don't know until you experience it. Is there anything looking back that may have been a sign that those clinical rotations wouldn't have suited you?
No, I think, look, it's easy to look at these things post hoc and say shoulda, woulda, coulda, or that was the sign and I should have paid attention to it. That's a post hoc analysis that is inherently flawed. I think, everyone that has been through this knows how much is imbued in the decision to become a doctor, whether that's family expectations, and oftentimes, as was the case with me, there are very heavy family expectations about the child becoming a doctor, whether that's because parents and relatives were doctors and that's what they want for you, or they weren't doctors and that's what they want.
So, or that's what they don't want for you and they did it.
Yeah, exactly. So it could be the expectations of other people. It could be your own expectations. It's the time and the energy and the sacrifice and both the time sacrifice, the social sacrifice, the financial sacrifice that everyone makes in order to become a doctor. And you can always look back and say, well, geez, that was the sign that I was unhappy, or that's what I should have paid attention to. But that's a tough, it's easy to do post hoc. It's much more difficult to do pre hoc because there is so much wrapped around that decision that it can really obscure the signs of discontent. And so, yes, I can certainly, within myself and my own experience, look back at various points. I would say even before I got to medical school, points before I got to med school, in college, in the summers in between, where I can look back and say, geez, I was questioning whether I wanted to become a doctor at that point in time. But that's hard to separate from the questions that I think any young adult asks themselves about what they want to be when they grow up. So it's difficult to tease these apart, and I try not to do that post-hoc analysis too much, but sure, I think about that frequently.
Good,
and
good
I think
answer.
that's important though, and I don't want to dwell on it too much, is this hindsight bias that we have. And you see this actually in physicians now, as well, I shouldn't have never done it. I should have never done it. But based on your experiences up to that point, whatever you did was the best decision that you could have made, because that's the decision that you made. The second part though, that I think is really critical, is there's a huge difference between lived experience and vicarious experience. And so one of the pitfalls about it being a physician in many ways is you really don't understand exactly what you're getting into until you're in the middle of the experience. And so that transition, like when you're talking about the transition between first 2 years of medical school and clinical rotations, for me, that was a shock. Like it was not a fun experience at all, that whole first transition. So remembering that very clearly. But once you're now in that experience and knowing, like you did, where you're just like, well, maybe it's the shock, maybe I'm going to give it some time, maybe I'm just going to determine, whether I'm going to adapt to this or not. Knowing that you're getting, tens of thousands, if not more, of student loans in this time, how did you then create the decision-making pathway that allowed you, rather than just to blindly accept and say, well, this is all I'm going to do, to make those active choices to identify and create something different for you?
Yeah, so Kevin, I think you're spot on when you sort of paint that picture of that dissonance that happens. I think there are very few professions, maybe medicine is the only one, where, at least in my estimation, the conception of what it's like to be a doctor, you have these idealistic goals, you have very noble goals, altruistic goals, you have a conception of what it means to be a physician, and then the reality of what it takes to actually get there and do it, those, the conception and the reality are polar opposites in my mind, and I can think of very few professions where that difference is as stark. Again, you want to be a doctor, you want to help people, but then, you also have to, at 3 a.m, go into a patient's room, wake them up, and, try to get a blood gas on them, and you spend 40 minutes poking into their arteries and having a miserable experience, right? Those are very different. Like the conception and the reality are very different. And so once I had kind of recognized that, then yes, it became there's, I would say, kind of two there's two pillars to the bridge, is the way I describe it. One of those pillars is saying, okay, well, medicine, I can understand that medicine isn't right for me. That's because I'm unhappy and I don't think this is what I want to do. And that's now become obvious to me in a way that it wasn't before. So you kind of bring that into your conscious thinking, and suddenly, the needle kind of scratches on the record and the music stops, and you say, okay, I understand that this isn't for me. You have to define for yourself, as I did, what is for me? What do I think I can enjoy doing? What are the attributes of a profession that will make me happy? Is it being creative? Is it being in a corporate setting? Is it doing something, in a different country? I mean, all these kind of questions, like, that basically say, okay, well, if medicine isn't it, what are the attributes of a profession that I would actually enjoy? So that's, I would say, one kind of side of the bridge. The other side of the bridge is then saying, okay, what's out there, right? Because we all go through whatever that point is where you, at which you say to yourself, medicine isn't for me. What have you done up until then? Well, you may have grown up wanting to be a doctor. You've certainly done a lot of science in your life. You were pre-med as an undergrad. You, to the exclusion of learning other things, you went to med school. You had your head down for 4 years. Maybe you did a residency for anywhere between 3 and 7 years. Then maybe you did a fellowship. So you've had these blinders on for your whole life to whatever point you come to this realization, you have these blinders on and you've just blurred out the rest of the world because you've been so singularly focused on this goal. And so then you have to go out and discover what else is there in the world? There's business, there's law, there's, creative arts, what is out there that I can do, and actually just learning about what those professions are. Maybe there's something that have to do with medicine, and maybe there's something that don't. And so that's the other side of the bridge. And then, once you've kind of put those two pillars in place, it's really just kind of building the span across those two pontoons of what do I want out of my profession, and what kind of professions are out there that can meet those needs. And so that process, which wasn't, I never would have described it in that kind of a technical way at the time, because I didn't know that's what I was doing. But now that I can look back and say, yeah, you have to look inside yourself, then you have to look in the outside world and kind of marry the two. And that process took, many, many months, maybe over the span of, almost a couple of years, I would say, for me to finally crystallize that.
So did you stop midstream in third year, or did you finished out to the end of the year or the fourth year, or where did you transition?
Yeah, so it was very fortuitous for me in particular, because it was at this exact time that I went to Columbia Med School, and at the exact time that I was going through this, the Med School and Columbia Business School decided to offer a joint degree program. This was in 1998, 1997, when I started thinking about this. And it was very fortuitous, because there were, I would say at the time, a few other joint degree programs at some of the institutions in the East Coast and the West Coast, but it wasn't particularly common. And I kind of, when I learned about this, and it was literally at exactly the time that I was a third year med student, I latched onto it, because, in a way that I think is comfortable for anyone that becomes a doctor, right? It was another degree. It was a familiar institution, and it was a comfortable ramp for me to make that transition from medicine into the business world. So I applied to that joint degree program as it was being formalized, as did a few of my classmates in med school. And I was one of the first to be accepted into that cohort of med students that were accepted to the business school. And so I got an MBA. I did a summer internship at a small boutique investment bank, working in their healthcare group, I might add, and ultimately received a job offer to go back there full time. So, time-wise, the way it worked was I took a pause effectively in what would have been, I guess the beginning of my fourth year of medical school. I got my MBA, did my summer internship, came back and finished the remainder of my fourth year of med school, and then started my full-time job.
Wow. So you did I guess you've had so many ventures. I'm kind of curious, what were your jumps from this investment banking? Where did that kind of lead you?
So I started at this investment bank full time, and I did that for 6 years. Mm-hmm. At the same time I was leaving med school, I founded something then known as the Dropout Club, now called DOC Jobs, but one of my med school classmates and I founded what at the time was a networking group to basically stay in touch with and network with people that had left or were leaving medicine and science to go into other things. We can talk more about that in a minute, but I spent 6 years in banking, and then decided at that point that I actually wanted to be an investor, right? So I was in banking, I was in healthcare finance, I was working with all sorts of innovative companies, biotech companies, medical device companies, helping them raise money and, you know, buy and sell businesses and do all the usual kinds of corporate transactions that go into a banking job. And it was at that point that I said, I want to be an investor in these companies, and I made that transition. And so that's for the last 16 years now, I've been a professional investor at a number of different funds here in New York, including kind of my own fund, and have been an active investor in, you know, many hundreds by now, I think, of biotech companies and medical device companies.
Wow.
So that, which almost, I think people would almost say was, seems like the opposite of health or healthcare or medicine in a lot of ways. But have you found then that your medical training, the things that you learned in medical school, have provided you an edge or a value added to your career path since then?
Without doubt. I mean, if what you're doing is trying to invest in promising science, promising drugs, promising medical devices, of course, it helps to have any level, whether that's having completed medical school, whether that's having completed residency or fellowship or having practiced medicine. Without a doubt, it helps to have the scientific premise of what these companies are trying to do. And so there is no question that I could not have done my job, although there are some that have, including one of my mentors and my old boss. It's I would have found it hard to do my job without the education and training that I had. Although, as I say, there are some healthcare investors who did not go to med school or do not have PhDs that are some of the most successful investors out there. But for me personally, it helped me enormously. And I would say that today, many of the portfolio managers and leading investors today, although this wasn't so true at the time that I did it, many of them have either MDs or PhDs because it has become, I would say, almost a de facto success element to being able to navigate the complexity of the science and the medicine and the pace of technological advancement that's going on.
I'm curious the types of things that you're into as far as investing or maybe getting other capital. Do you find that because of your medical background and being a physician, do you have a tendency to, or do you have as part of your network, a big network of physician investors more so probably than the average person? It's kind of a vague question, but.
Yeah, I would say not so much. I would say, the people that I've interacted with and the people that have been investors in the funds that I've worked with have largely not been physicians. They've been professional investors, capital allocators who I think understand the promise of what biotechnology has to offer and the value that it can create if a drug is developed successfully, for example, but for whom I would say the expertise is not something that they possess. And so they look to a professional, let's say biotech investor, to help them invest their money in the most promising companies. So I would say, yeah, certainly a lot of people I would consider my peers, analysts, portfolio managers, people on what you call the sell side, the people that write the stock research for the investment banks, very much, high percentage of those people are doctors or scientists. But from the investor side, I would say that, and that's the value you can add, is actually helping someone that doesn't have that expertise think about how to invest in the sector.
Well, in expanding on that a little bit, I think to myself, as a lot of physicians are trading time for money and their autonomy or their free time is just limited. And hopefully those listening that want to create some free time and learn how to invest and let the money work for them instead of them, the other way around. Is there any way or any resource I know this is something you gain wisdom, and if you're not getting a degree, which I find that some people that are incredibly successful financially never got a degree. They're just incredibly brilliant with how they go about things. Is there anywhere you'd have like physicians start, or what would be your suggestion, or like a nugget to help them consider or learn about how to invest, their money in ways that it works for them?
Yeah, look, there's, I would say the good news is today there is just a practically infinite number of resources that one can tap into. There are all sorts of, if what you want to do is learn how to invest, there are all sorts of online resources, many of which are free. Khan Academy, Coursera, there's, literally hundreds of people, classes, resources that you can take either for free or for a modest fee, online universities that teach you the principles of investing, you know, in a conceptual way. There are the leading money managers that all write and publish extensively about what they do, including on social media, where they give away some of their best techniques and thought processes for free. So there's literally just an infinite amount of information that you can access to start thinking about and reading about how to invest. That, however, does not replace the process of doing it. So in addition to having a conceptual framework of what it's like, I tell people the best thing to do is pick some companies that you know or that you're interested. They could be in healthcare, they could be not. If you're a doctor, it could be a company that makes one of the drugs you prescribe or one of the drugs that you really like. Read their 10K on the SEC website, look at their management presentation, listen to their quarterly conference calls, listen to the questions they get, read their press releases about the data they're presenting. This is the bread and butter of investing in a biotech company, and really any company, is doing your due diligence, and there's nothing to replace doing that. So you know, here again, there's the conceptual and the framework, which is, you know, again, I would say when I started doing this, there wasn't much available. Now it's infinite resources. And then there's the process of doing it. And that's really what I tell people, like, if this is what you think you want to do, just try it, do it. It's free. You don't need a degree, and anyone can do it, and it's out there.
Yeah, you don't have to pay for medical school and have to go through it. You can just go through it without paying for the training. Yeah,
and I think that's
the best lessons are free for sure.
But I like that. It's such a simple way. Just pick something that you already like, and then actually do it. Right. But I want to go back again to you're transitioning out of medical school. You're starting your first new career. Mm-hmm. But at the time, you said you started the Dropout Club, and the first question I have is, when you did that, because you said it was more about a connection, kind of to a connection and networking thing. Were you shocked, or did you already know that there were physicians out there that were no longer, or either chose actively not to do medicine, or maybe transition out of medicine, or what were your discoveries at that time?
Yeah, so my discovery at the time was, in fact, that there were very few people that had done it, and I had a hard time finding them. So I started on some good advice that I got from some advisors. You know, they said, just try to find people that have done what you're looking to do and get in touch with them and see how they did it. So I started looking at things like, you know, directories of physician executives. At the time, you know, the place to find people that had left medicine and moved into the corporate world were insurance companies. That was, you know, the biotechnology industry was still relatively immature back then in the late 90s. And the easy place to go was to an insurance company, or to be, you know, in like hospital administration. And so I wrote to the people that I could find. I only found one person at the time that was a doctor that had made the transition to an investment bank. Okay, now you can, you know, it's hard to walk into an investment bank and find, you know, if you go to meet the people that do the biotech stock research or the pharma stock research, almost to a person, everyone has an MD or a PhD. At the time, that transition had not been made. So I started looking around. I had a hard time finding people. And that's, I would say, what kind of led me to start the Dropout Club and to kind of seek community with people that were thinking about and doing the same thing, was really just to say, okay, who else is out there? What are you doing? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you learning about? Who are you talking to? Which companies are hiring? You know, pharma also, I would say, was probably kind of a, you know, it was also a place to think about and look. And so this classmate of mine from med school and I just started this networking group, and that's how it started, was an in-person networking group. We just said, okay, let's meet for drinks. First time there were 5 or 6 of us. We said, let's do it again, you know, 3 months from now. You know, that time everyone brought a friend, and so there were 10, and then there were 20, and then there were 40, and it kind of followed this doubling curve. And you know, for a while we were doing these networking events once a quarter, and, you know, we had several hundred people coming to them, and then they spread to other cities, and it sort of grew in this very organic way, I think, just driven by this continual need, which I would say still exists today, to find community with people that had been on this one track and had made the transition to another.
And so with those early on, my assumption then, because you're talking is 10 to 20 to 30, these were not physicians that had dropped out, all of them per se, but most of them to start were people who were interested in moving into non-clinical spaces.
It was a mix. It was a mix. It was people like me that had said, okay, I'm getting off the medicine track. I'm not matching in the residency match. I'm, you know, at the time I was in business school and then I was in banking. So it was people like me that had fully exited clinical medicine. And then there were people that were very much still thinking about it. Okay, I'm in residency. One of my close friends to this day is someone that I met at that time who was in an emergency medicine residency, but thinking about it. Okay, so the people that were still kind of on that track, but questioning and looking to, you know, put their head up and see what else was out there. So it was a mix.
And I love that because based on whoever's listening to this now, you're going to get two different reactions, because if you're a newer physician, you're like, oh, well, that totally makes sense. Da, 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 da. But if you have any history in kind of pre-Google, you're like, this was a big deal to start what you did at the time you started, because there really wasn't anything like this in this space at all. I mean, today you can, you shake a stick and, we're podcasting about it, but back then, so you just went out and do it. So, I'd be really kind of curious then, as this progressed, because you decided to do it because there was nothing there. You started this networking space, and it continues to evolve and grow. So there's obviously a need, because there's interested parties over and over and over again. What did you decide to do next with this? Because if you go to the website, which we're going to talk about in a second, it is not a small meetup anymore of 6 people. It's significantly beyond that. So how did that transition, and how did you start leveraging that and growing it from there?
Yeah, so I would say for the first, almost the first, 5 or 6 years of its life, it was a very kind of gumshoe operation. We started it, like I said, in 1999. We put up a very rudimentary website at the time. Remember, this was pre-LinkedIn, this was pre-iPhone, this was contact folders. We put up a very rudimentary website where we said, here's my name, here's my email address, and this is where I work. And it was literally a list of people. And if you wanted to join, at the time you had to kind of have someone refer you in. So people would join up, and then we would distribute by email the meetup times and locations. And then I would say, a couple of years into it, as it was growing, we started to get requests where someone would say, hey, I'm, Joe Smith. I work in business development at Pfizer, and we're looking to hire a doctor to work on our business development team. Can you post this job to the network? Okay, that was exactly that was exactly our mission, was to help physicians find jobs and kind of create this network. And so we did that. And we did it for free for a while. And then, we realized that we were providing a valuable service both to the employers that were looking to hire this talent, as well as to our members. And so we then made the decision to start charging employers, a job posting fee to post a job to our network. And, for the next several years, then the network just grew organically, both, I would say more so out of benign neglect, because I was working full-time in banking, and then in the investing world, my partner spent some time in startups, but then went into the consulting world. And so in the early stages, this was a very mission-driven kind of entity where, yes, we charged some money for the postings, and we never charged members, by the way, because we didn't want to limit people's willingness or ability to join. But it grew in a very organic way, adding, several hundred members every month without any advertising, just really through word of mouth. And I'd say all along the way, we've raised our prices as the years have gone by, never really had much pushback from employers, I think, because they recognize that they can hire great talent from among our group of people at very low cost. We've started charging some different fees more recently as more of a business decision. But the network really has grown, I would say, organically by word of mouth. And if you look at our growth curve, for the first 10 years, it was sort of flat. And then just in the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years, it's really been that hockey stick kind of inflection where we've gone from adding, several hundred to low thousands of members per year to adding now several thousand members per year. And as you noted, we're over 60,000 members at this point in time and growing every month. And so it's been this, very much an organic growth story. We're now looking to invest somewhat in member growth and employer awareness as I would say, as I said, a more recent business initiative. But really the growth of what's now called DOC has been entirely, I would say, through word of mouth, and just, again, born of the need to find community among people that have made this transition or want to make it.
Yeah. I'm really impressed with
Are you at the website?
Size. Besides what you're going on, I guess you have a pretty good team now that's managing this for you. It's not just you and a couple people now.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty lean operation. I spend a fair amount of time on DOC. I have my partner. He's got a full-time job, but he also, spends his spare time on, on a number of the initiatives. We have an outsourced tech team of several great guys that do all of our tech work. We have a part-time general manager who's a grad student who does a great job for us in managing our employer relationships. We have someone that helps us with member marketing and awareness. So I would say it's this very kind of lean virtual team that manages it. And, at some point we'll make that more permanent. But for now, we're kind of, operating a lean kind of outsourced model.
Well, that's great, because, you said for a while it was just kind of, there was obviously a purpose and a mission, but the fact that you held on to it for all this time allowed it the opportunity to scale the way it has and reach so many people. That says a lot. And obviously the day and age we live in, virtually having a team and allowing these communities to prosper, that says a lot. But congrats on, I know you're doing a lot more than just this, so that's really great work.
But what I have to comment, though, is it was just amazing to me is we're only talking about US, but you've expanded all over the place.
Yeah.
It's just remarkable the number of meetups and chapters when you go to DOC Jobs. Is it DOC Jobs? Yeah, docjobs.com. And I'm just looking at the number of chapters is insane. Croatia, Ethiopia, Iran. It's just talk about a community. This thing has just exploded.
Yeah, there's chapters in, when you sign up, you're automatically assigned to be in the chapter of whatever state or country you live in. We just do that to help kind of notify people about particular events or meetups that may be in their area. It also helps with some of the job targeting algorithms that we have. But yeah, there are members in every 50 state and I think 156 countries around the world, which is, I would say a testament also to the kind of nerve that I think is touched when you present clinicians and scientists with the opportunity to do other things with their careers besides just what they trained their whole lives to do. It's really touched a nerve in a very kind of gratifying way.
Yeah, and then the inherent desire by most humans to have community.
For sure.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So what is your life now? Are you kind of mentioned that this is a lean operation, but are you putting more time and attention to DOC Jobs? Or you have other interests that you're in, or what are you doing?
Yeah, so I split my time in a couple of ways now, and I do spend a substantial amount of time on DOC, on the initiatives to grow membership. We have competition now in the form of LinkedIn and some other venues, although I don't think LinkedIn it's obviously a big community of professionals. It doesn't have nearly the kind of specificity that I think our community does, but there are other venues now for people to to find this kind of community. So I spend a lot of time thinking about growth initiatives, driving employer awareness, trying to drive our our awareness among employers and recruiters and so forth. And I spend a fair amount of time on that because I do think there is a lot of untapped potential in the member community that we have, and I think there's substantial growth ahead of us. I also spend some time still in the investing world, and also helping some startup teams and operations think about early stage R&D. I would say that's more kind of consulting work that I do in various areas. So I spread my time around on, I would say, a number of different places where I enjoy spending my time, and where I feel like I can add value to groups and initiatives that can benefit from the work that I've done.
Well, before we finish off here, I just wanted to ask if somebody, for various reasons, if a physician wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best venue or website or place for them to connect with you?
Yeah, so certainly anyone that's interested in becoming a member of DOC can go to the website www.docjobs.com. It's free to sign up. It takes 2 minutes, and then you can be in the flow of everything that we're doing, all the jobs that come through our network and the events and what have you. If someone has a question about something related to the website, we have a contact email, which is contact@docjobs.com. And then if someone wants to get in touch with me personally about something, my email is Rael, R-A-E-L, @docjobs.com. We offer, some interesting services and advice through DOC. You can go to the website to learn all about that. But if someone has a question for me, they can just email me directly.
Awesome. Kevin, any last words?
Well, just one last question for you is, if being the Rael now, and you can go back in time and visit pre-Rael, is there anything that you would now we're talking about hindsight bias, but is there anything that you would tell the younger you, or advice that you would give that you think would have been beneficial?
I think the advice I would give my younger self, and it's advice that I give to people that I talk to from time to time, is if you, I think the tendency for people that go through medical training is one of inertia, right? There's this pre-programmed sense of, this is what I'm doing, this is what I thought I wanted to do, this is the track that I'm on, I've invested all this time, I've invested all this energy and money. And the advice I would have given to myself, which is absolutely hindsight bias, but which I try to give to people now in a proactive way, is if you think that you can be happier, could be happier, doing other things, you absolutely should pay attention to that instinct. Because you don't want to land up in a position of someone who spends the next 15 years doing something that you ultimately realize post-hoc you didn't really want to do, and then you've sacrificed another decade of your life doing it. The good news, I would say, is that today there are just a whole host of options for doctors and scientists to have sort of varied and interesting career options that didn't exist 5 and 10 years ago. The gig economy has kind of arrived in medicine and in healthcare. You don't have to give up clinical practice. You don't have to give up academic science. You can do other things in a part-time way. And so it doesn't have to be this binary all or nothing, do I stay, do I go? There are plenty of ways to bridge that gap. And so the advice, to be very crisp about your question, is just go out and do it. Just think about it, learn about it, see what's out there, and pay attention to that instinct, because there really is just an enormous array of opportunities that one can pursue to try to to expand one's career.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for joining us, and it's quite evident that you're a very you love learning, you're inquisitive, you enjoyed a lot of the things that had to do with medicine, but there are other things that so many of us might enjoy more. and you had the courage to shift and pivot into things that bring you more joy. And I think it's a great testimony that there are options, and that there are way more options nowadays. And I think you're wise to say what you just said, and that we do need to explore and know thyself, as they usually say, and pay attention to those things so we make good choices for us down the road. So thank you again for those listening. Thank you for joining the Change Physician podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.